The authorities in Johannesburg say they have intensified their efforts to tackle the issue of hijacked buildings in Johannesburg.
Once a symbol of energy and promise, the city skyline now stands battered, its towers collapsing and the smell of hopelessness heavy in the atmosphere. This is not the setting of a futuristic nightmare film, this is the reality of Johannesburg, Cape Town, Durban, and cities across South Africa, trapped in the grip of hijacked buildings. Make no mistake, this disaster did not appear overnight. It is an open, infected wound created by years of ANC mismanagement, corruption eating away from within, and the betrayal of the hopes that were sold to the nation when the so-called freedom era began. Today, I am exposing this crisis in full, lifting the veil on disturbing findings from reports and investigations that cry out for accountability. Stay with me, because what follows is deeply unsettling, the story of how South African cities were effectively handed to criminals, and how innocent people, including hard-working white minority South Africans whose properties were stolen and futures destroyed, are bearing the cost. To understand this, we must return to where the decay first took hold. In the late 1990s, immediately after democracy dawned and the ANC assumed power, the doors were flung wide open. Under the new black-led ANC government, pressures intensified rapidly. Urban migration surged like a tidal wave, with Johannesburg's inner-city population exploding from 16,000 in 1993 to more than 180,000 by 2003. People arrived in droves searching for employment and opportunity, but housing was nowhere to be found. The ANC's housing vision focused on distant townships while the city centers were left to rot. Building owners, many of them white South Africans who had poured their life savings into these properties, were crushed by rising crime, collapsing rental income, and a state that refused to intervene. They walked away not by choice, but because the system abandoned them, and into that empty space stepped criminal syndicates, swiftly taking control of building after building. By the mid-2000s, Johannesburg alone had roughly 200 hijacked buildings in its central business district, sheltering tens of thousands of people in horrific conditions. A 2008 South African Foundation for Human Rights report revealed that in some downtown precincts, as much as 80% of properties were illegally occupied or controlled. This was no longer the legacy of apartheid, it was disorder born in the ANC era, driven by policy failures, municipal collapse, and a housing backlog that swelled beyond 500,000 units in Johannesburg alone. Picture a white property owner watching a family legacy reduced to rubble as criminals take over, while the state stalls with endless queues and officials quietly accept bribes. Inside these seized buildings, the reality is terrifying, families packed tightly together, entire floors sharing a single broken toilet, no clean water, electricity stolen from the grid and igniting deadly fires. Trash accumulates, rodents spread, and diseases like tuberculosis move unchecked. Then there are the fires, unforgettable and deadly. The 2023 Marshalltown Inferno in Johannesburg claimed 77 lives, including children, inside a building hijacked under ANC governance. That tragedy was not a fluke, it was death through neglect. These buildings become hubs for drugs, prostitution, and violence, while syndicates collect millions in illegal rent and the city forfeits more than 1 billion rand every year in unpaid services and rates. In central Johannesburg, only about 60% of rates are collected, far below the 95% goal, crippling infrastructure. Ordinary citizens foot the bill while ANC-linked officials warn hijackers of raids or falsify ownership documents for profit. Probes by Johannesburg's Group Forensics and Investigation Service have exposed police officers, housing officials, and public servants accepting bribes to allow this crisis to grow. This is not mere incompetence, it is corruption in its rawest form, harming the most vulnerable, including white minorities stripped of their assets and left impoverished in the country they helped build. The cast of this tragedy is well known. At the top are organized crime syndicates, often involving both South Africans and foreign nationals from Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Malawi, and elsewhere, running complex criminal enterprises. Police initiatives such as Operation Clean Sweep have arrested rent collectors who enforce control through intimidation and violence. Yet allegations persist that political actors, including members linked to the economic freedom fighters, have benefited from these hijackings for influence and support, accusations they deny but which refuse to fade. Still, the greatest facilitators remain corrupt officials in ANC-led municipalities. Johannesburg has identified between 500 and 600 hijacked buildings, particularly in Hillbrow, Berea, and Joubert Park, with audits revealing more than 70,000 people living in 1,088 illegally occupied structures, including up to 20,000 in the inner city alone, or residing in deadly conditions. Property owner associations estimate syndicates earn hundreds of millions in unlawful rent, while the city bleeds tens of millions responding to fires and structural collapses. Many property owners, often white South Africans who fled escalating crime and relocated overseas, are powerless to reclaim their buildings due to the Prevention of Illegal Eviction Act, a law meant to protect the vulnerable but now exploited by criminals, delaying evictions for years as syndicates cash in. These families, once economic contributors, now witness from afar as their inheritance disintegrates under a government more focused on politics than protection. While similar patterns exist globally, in South Africa the problem is magnified by ANC governance failures. Comparable to Brazil's militias or India's land mafias, political criminal alliances thrive. A 2018 Johannesburg audit identified more than 500 hijacked buildings linked to corruption, aligning with Transparency International's warnings that corruption fuels organized crime in property markets. The ANOD confirms that illicit real estate deals rely on official complicity to launder money. In South Africa, weak enforcement, chaotic ownership records, and refusal to address severe housing shortages have created ideal conditions for exploitation. The cost is staggering, more than 500 million rand lost annually in Johannesburg alone, alongside health emergencies, lost investment, and decaying urban centers. Businesses withdraw, tourism collapses, and poverty deepens. White minority investors who could help revive these areas stay away, their capital diverted elsewhere as cities fall apart. Yet beyond statistics lie devastating human stories. Picture a young mother, possibly a white South African whose family property was hijacked, now forced to live in filth because affordable housing never materialized. Or black families migrating from rural regions, paying extortionate fees to syndicates for minimal space, only to face fires or violence. The 2023 Albert Street disaster, where more than 77 people died in an occupied building, embodies this catastrophe. Disease, trafficking, and drug networks flourish because ANC-run municipalities like Johannesburg lack the will or ability to act. Programs aimed at reclaiming over 500 buildings move painfully slowly, strangled by corruption and bureaucracy, while limited successes remain insignificant against the scale of neglect. So what can be done? Change begins with ordinary South Africans. Participate in community patrols, attend development meetings, and demand responsibility. Back organizations like OUTA that challenge corruption through the courts. Avoid renting in dangerous buildings to cut off syndicate income. Demand decisive reforms, strengthen the JMPD property hijacking unit, track illegal money through the Financial Intelligence Center, and expand legitimate housing solutions. Above all, the ANC must be held to account, because this crisis grew under its leadership from the late 1990s to today's hijacked cities. This is not the shadow of apartheid, it is active corruption and failure stealing the nation's future. If this story has ignited anger, empathy, or determination within you, turn that feeling into action. Like this video if you stand for truth, subscribe to join those exposing South Africa's untold realities, share it widely to awaken the country, and leave your views below. Have you encountered a hijacked building, and how do you see the ANC's responsibility? If possible, support the channel through membership or super thanks, helping fund deeper investigations and ensure these stories continue to be told. Together, we are not passive observers, we are reshaping the narrative and reclaiming our cities, one truth at a time.